Let's talk.
John Brown.
Where the Earth Meets the Sky is a story of penguins, people, and place in Antarctica, set in the coldest, most inaccessible landscape on the planet. This is a story of a female scientist navigating Antarctica's extreme wilderness, revealing how nature can heal the human soul. Delighted to welcome onto the show author of Where the Earth Meets the Sky, Louise Blight. Louise, good afternoon from us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Judging from the background that I can see, you are not in some sort of scientific station somewhere on either of the poles.
Well, I could be. I could be in a station with a lot of books, but I'm not. I'm at home.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you basically ended up in Antarctica. What was the lure of Antarctica for you?
Yeah, good question. How did I end up in Antarctica? It was a place I'd always wanted to go, as I say in the start of the book. My dad had worked in the Arctic, and I was sort of drawn to these remote, barren places. And as time went on, I got a biology degree, and I applied for work there. I initially started working in Antarctica on what's called expedition cruise ships. So I was a boat driver, a naturalist, a visiting scientist. And then, so I'd worked in Antarctica quite a number of years when I applied for the job at Cape Royds on the Penguin Project and got it. And so that was how I ended up working there in the summer that I write about in Where the Earth Meets the Sky. And
try not to sound like a complete idiot, but the Penguin Project, now presumably, and this is how much I know about biology, but it is the study of penguins in the natural environment, he said, hopefully?
That's right. I applied to work on something that was being run through the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm a Canadian and a Brit. I was born in the U.K., actually. I immigrated to Canada as a little kid. And always been really interested in birds, including marine birds. And so this study of penguins, this particular one is something that was run by somebody called David Ainley, who's worked in the Antarctic since about the late 1960s when he did his PhD there. And this is his particular long-term study looking at the species Adelie penguins on Ross Island, which is about as far south as they occur anywhere. So he was looking at that particular part of the study. As I said, it's a long-term study. So he was looking at what was called the geographic structuring of Adelie penguins. That was the name of that phase of the project. And so there are several colonies on the island where we worked and in the larger region. And so the idea was to look at how penguins were moving among the different colonies. And this was in relation to this big, what we call a natural experiment. So the natural experiment in this case was this massive iceberg that's the size of Prince Edward Island that was grounded against Ross Island, and it was changing the ice patterns of the entire Ross Sea. That's how big it was. So we're looking at how penguins were responding to that in terms of things like returning to their colonies, breeding success, and so on.
I know this is going to sound, again, another idiot question, but here you go. Antarctica, I mean, it's because we're used to being in a world where you can get on a flight and the next day you're in New Zealand or something like that. That used to be an advert. Tomorrow you could be anywhere. You can't just leap on a flight and get to Antarctica. It is a trek. You said I used to be a boat driver. Presumably this is an ice crush or something like that. So how long are you going out of Chile? Are you going out of how are you getting to where you're going, and how long does it take?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a good way of putting the isolation there into some perspective. So when I first started working there in Antarctica, as I said, I was working on cruise ships, and we would leave from southern South America, so Tierra del Fuego, and take a ship across the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the part of Antarctica that, people, if you see a map of the continent, you see it's a kind of a circle with a big handle sticking up. That's right, the handle. And so that's very far north in Antarctica. And so the ships that are doing tourism largely do that route and get to the most northerly part in about 2 days at sea. So that's kind of a trek in and of itself. But to go to Ross Island, which is much further south in the Ross Sea, You have to fly to New Zealand. As you said, you can get to New Zealand, long flight, but you can get there. But then you have to go to Christchurch, wait in Christchurch for a military flight, and then spend another sort of 6 hours on a military flight getting to the research station at McMurdo / Scott Base, which is the New Zealand station there. And so, of course, you can't, not just anyone can get on a military flight. You have to be part of the Antarctic program to get there.
When you arrived there for the first time, because I am that worst sort of creature, an armchair historian, and recently there was a book called A Journey for Madmen, I think it was, talking about a Belgian explorer who got himself marooned, trapped in the ice on purpose for 2 years, and then of course the Shackleton and Endeavour, which is just a ridiculous story. But one of the things that struck me was the insane beauty and the size of because we used to see mountains, with a little ski run or a little shack there, a little cabin. These are these leviathans that are standing there, and the wind's just whipping it out of nowhere. I mean, the sensory overload when you see these mountain ranges or these ice packs must be incredible.
It's a stunning environment, a stunning natural environment, a beautiful place to be. The first book that you talked about, by the way, is called Madhouse at the End of the Earth.
That's the one. Yes, sorry, excuse me.
It's about the Belgian expedition on the Belgica, which is a really fantastic story. And as you said, they drive themselves. Well, the captain, expedition leader, drove the ship deliberately into the ice, unbeknownst to virtually all of the ship's crew, so that they could overwinter there. And it was incredibly extreme. My time there was not that extreme. And I was there in the summer, not the winter. So instead of 24 hours of darkness, we had 24 hours of daylight. But yeah, the environment there is overwhelmingly powerful, beautiful, just kind of soul stripping. There's just, you feel like such a little insignificant speck in the landscape of these incredible, massive white mountains and massive icebergs and frozen ocean and, virtually no human beings. I was there with one other person.
The thing they say when you put on your social media and there's some idiot going, what you really need to do is go for a walk in nature and you'll get back to yourself. Well, this book is about that, but this isn't nature as in little fluffy bunny. This is nature, what is basically red in tooth and claw. Or, this is, so, I mean, how, because this isn't just a book about, here I am looking at what penguins are up to. This is a book about, stripping back yourself, as you said, in the way that, the mountains or the glaciers are being stripped back.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well said. It is. I started to write the book and I thought I'd be writing a sort of dry scientific account about doing penguin research, and it did really start to emerge as something that was more personal than that, about what it is like to be so isolated for so long. But you talked about, everyone's talking about go for a walk in nature and heal yourself. And I'm kind of interested in what it is that people relate to about this book, because in some ways it's completely unrelatable. Most people, virtually nobody, is going to go and do something like this. But there are themes that everyone can relate to. So I think in some ways going for a walk in nature is like this. If you stop and pay attention and see the magical little moments, there are more distractions. There's more likely to be vehicle noise or things like that. But nature can still be really immersive. And I think that's one of the things that's appealing to this story about people, is just realizing that we can have that experience in a way wherever we go in the natural world.
But many of us never get the chance to be on our own. Or you say, I'd love to get away from, or just be on my own, again, in that cabin in the woods or whatever. But the stark reality can be quite something. We're used to traffic noise. We're used to interacting with other people. And I know this is part of the job that you're doing, but still, it can be, again, an overwhelming experience for a lot of people, presumably.
Yes, and that's one of the challenges of working in places like this, is the isolation, the loneliness, and not just in Antarctica. I've worked in very remote places in Canada, for example, where you helicopter in, you don't see you're there with your field crew, but you don't see anyone else for 6 weeks till the helicopter comes back to do a crew exchange. So there are other places that, if you're working as a wildlife biologist, for example, you get out into that sort of isolation, but it can be very challenging. People learned about that in the pandemic, obviously, during lockdowns and the difficulty of being alone. So those are the sorts of mental challenges that you face, but at the same time, there are tremendous upsides, I think, to that sort of time alone in a natural environment. And I was talking to a friend about what that kind of isolation is like. And I said, imagine you go for a walk on your own and the walk goes on for about 2.5 months. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, I kind of get that. But at the same time, you are away from, I was going to say, the increasing craziness of the world, but you're in Antarctica, and there is no greater demonstration of how far south things are going with the ice packs, etc. And I know it's that we're going to waving our little flags in the air here, but you not only are you away from the day to day of the world, but you're seeing right in front of you the impact that we're having on the planet.
Yeah, it's a paradox that you're so isolated, about as isolated as you can be anywhere on the face of the planet, and yet you still see the impact of humanity there.
So, what was the chispa? What was the spark to write this, to put this down and and record the experiences? Because it's not a how to survive, on whale blubber or whatever walrus, is it? So I know nothing. So what was the spark? What was the idea behind writing this particular book?
The chispa, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I started to write the book, and I thought for a long time that I would write it. I kept a journal every day while I was on this particular trip, because as I said to a colleague when I went, I could write a book about it one day, because it's not like, and it's an experience that most people will have. And so I kept the journals and kept thinking, well, maybe I'll write a book. And life went on, and I went back to university to do a PhD and, worked. And there's just not a lot of time to sit down and write a book. And I'd originally thought it would just be something dry about doing penguin science. And then it kind of, I started it a couple of times, didn't know how relevant it would be in terms of relating to other people's interests. As I said, it's not particularly relatable. And then Antarctica really started to emerge in the news. When I first started going to Antarctica, people barely knew where it was. And now it's in the news all the time with penguins and melting ice shelves and so on. And I thought, well, I actually have something to contribute to people's interest in that part of the world. And so I did write it. And as things emerged, it became more a story about, a changing continent. And as I said, it became more personal than I expected that it would be. And I think relatable to people who are interested in penguins and wilderness and adventure and isolation and all those sorts of things that they mean to people in their everyday lives.
I mean, we all had experiences of isolation, but I suppose, what happened 6 years ago for you, probably you would like, yeah, well, that's, because forget about it, going for a walk for 2 months. That's just, that's just my basic week, I suppose, sort of being on your own, not able to get around a bit.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I was talking to a friend who's also a seabird ecologist about the isolation of the pandemic lockdown. And she said, yeah, that was really easy for me. And I said, yes, it was for me too. And we talked about how we got through it. And, we talked to people around us about basic things that you need when you're in that sort of situation, which are things like a routine, a work and a personal routine. You need some modicum of privacy in your life. And, you need to have a door you can close. And you need to not give up on personal hygiene. But those are all sort of basic things that help you to maintain a positive frame of mind and kind of enjoy seeing the world unfold around you.
What's the reaction been like? Well, have you been quite pleased and surprised by the way that people have taken this up, your book?
Yeah, as I said, I'm intrigued about what it is that um, people relate to in the story. Obviously, everyone loves penguins. Everyone loves watching a video of animals, or sometimes finds animals more relatable than people. And I think also people have all felt cut off or isolated. It's about being a woman in a man's world. There are a lot of things that people can get out of this book.
What's up for you next? Are you heading back to the Antarctic soon, or are you going to do a book tour? Are you going to be starring in the movie? What's your next move, Louise?
I will be doing some work around the book. As I mentioned, I did my PhD after the Antarctic trip, and that work I started studying gulls. So I talk about skuas quite a bit in the book. They're an Antarctic gull, and so I switched from penguins to gulls, and so that's what I study now. As I work on seagulls in Canada.
The book is called Where the Earth Meets the Sky, a story of penguins, people and place in Antarctica. Listeners, you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Just click on the front cover and it'll be winging its way to you. Louise, do you do social media? Is there a website? Can people find you online?
There will be a website up soon. There are my bios through various publishers, Westbourne Press in the UK, Penguin Random House in Canada and Australia, and I'm on Blue Sky.
The book is called Where the Earth Meets the Sky. It's by Louise K. Blight. Louise, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Charles. Pleasure.